Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Helen Campbell, and I'm going to talk to you now about driverless cars. I will mention Uber, I'll mention Google, and I mention, Stanford University. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons and the way things look for the future. And I'll start now. Now, personally, I do not enjoy driving one little bit. I have a car to go from A to B. But if I can take a taxi, and not Uber, by the way, but that's another story for later, if I can take a taxi or a bus or even walk, I would much rather do so. Now, I do not include cycling in this. Cycling in towns, in my opinion, is far too dangerous, especially in Brussels, where I live. If you cycle in Brussels, you are permitted to break every single traffic regulation in the book. You don't take any notice at all of the highway code. Cyclists drive the wrong way down one-way streets. They frequently don't even cover their heads, no helmets to be seen. And the speciality here in Brussels is the cyclist riding at night with no lights on. Of course, many of us would prefer to ride our bikes where we can, and then, if not, drive. So, depending on whether you're driving or cycling, you tend to be angry at the other group. At any rate, in summary, cars and bikes are risky, can be very dangerous, and really it's a worry all the time. What about motorway driving? That's awful as well. It's very boring. You're just driving along in a lane of traffic, and the traffic tends to be fast. And then, of course, there are people switching lanes all the time. I have to admit, I noticed that this is a speciality in France. Changing lanes with no signal, of course. Let's look at a little anecdote from me. Last summer, I drove to the UK, and I was going towards London, and I got completely stuck on the London Ring Road, the M25. I was stuck there for some 3 hours, but this was a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. It's perfectly standard, par for the course, and I should have known better. So, in a nutshell, driving is boring, it's dangerous, and it's also very expensive. You need to buy a car or a bike. You need to have insurance. You have to park. And, of course, fuel costs money too. All in all, lots of disadvantages. But what if it weren't like this? What if it were all different in future? What if you could go to a party and not have to worry about having a glass of wine? What if you could simply snooze while driving along the motorway? Let somebody else take control. Park neatly in a small space. Well, that may come sooner than we think. I'm sure you all know about driverless cars because they've had a lot of publicity recently. Google is investing heavily, so is Uber. They're all investing in this new technology. Those whose living depends on driving, such as taxi cab drivers or long-distance lorry drivers, are very worried. They're worried, and rightly so, that in 10 years they will be jobless. Their jobs will be obsolete. And they may well be right. If not in 10 years, then probably in 15, yes. I was watching a really interesting programme on the BBC recently, all about driverless cars and recent developments. A number of people were trying out, test driving these cars and looking at pros and cons. Notably in California, Stanford University is doing a lot of advanced research and testing of these vehicles. One of the drivers said that she had trouble not touching the steering wheel, and staying alert all the time, which apparently is still necessary. She found it difficult to stay awake. She said the temptation when you're not doing anything is to fall asleep. Another story. This was a man who was test driving a Tesla car, a sports model actually, and the car decided to go into the middle lane of the motorway where it stayed. Naturally, the other drivers around were furious, as one can imagine. Lots of not very pleasant gestures were made to the person in the Tesla car. But it wasn't his fault. He couldn't do anything about it. The car decided. The drivers around were even more alarmed when they saw that the man was driving, as it were, hands off the wheel. So, is this likely to be the way of things in the future? If you want to test drive any of these cars, you can do so, and you'll see that there are 5 different levels. So when you get up to the top level 5, that means you do absolutely nothing at all. You just sit back. That TV program I referred to showed different situations for these cars and drivers. In some cases, the driver still managed the route, while the car decided on the maneuvers. Interesting. But is it perhaps the case that we are overestimating the impact of technology in the short term, but underestimating it in the long term? That's a question. Of course, a Tesla car can drive, can cruise, can change lanes, but it's not exactly rocket science. That's for now, but what about in 10 years' time? All sorts of things are possible, and advances are sure. In addition, there will be a lot of knock-on effects. As the TV program pointed out, there will be fewer accidents. So there are implications for the accident units in hospitals, implications for doctors and nurses as well. There are all sorts of knock-on effects that we haven't really thought about. And how the cars are built as well. I mean, why bother with a crash-resistant thing if the car isn't going to crash at all? And then no need to park either. You can just summon the car whenever you want to. It's interesting to note that in the United States, there are some 100 million cars, and 97% of the time those cars are actually parked. And then, just supposing that the driverless car does crash, it's going to happen. Who is to blame? Is it the car designer? The driver who wasn't actually driving? As you see, there are a lot of questions to be answered here. There are many unknowns, but there's quite a lot to hope for. So I think we can all watch with interest and just see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.